If you've ever felt like your emotions were steering your life more than your intentions, then what we're exploring today may feel like someone finally opening a door you didn't know you were allowed to walk through. For all the talk about healing, growth, shadow work, and emotional processing, very few people are told the one truth that will change everything. Emotional transformation doesn't depend on time. It depends on interruption, authority, and the willingness to stop repeating emotional states that were never meant to define you. Some people hear that and worry we're dismissing their pain. We're not. We're returning a level of power many people have been conditioned to hand away. If you've been told healing must be slow, linear, and endlessly layered, it makes sense that you'll treat yourself like a long-term project instead of a conscious creator. But your emotional system wasn't built for endurance. It was built for rapid adaptation. It reorganizes the moment it recognizes a new emotional truth as more real than the old one. Emotional loops don't persist because they're deep. They persist because they're practiced. They continue because no one interrupts them in the moment they begin. When that moment is finally met with awareness instead of automatic surrender, the pattern starts to unravel. This is where real transformation begins.
I want to speak directly to the person who feels they've done everything they were told would help. You try the affirmations, the journaling, the reframing. You revise the same emotional stories so many times that you could recite them in your sleep. And yet, this change still feels like something you chase rather than something you inhabit. Eventually, you start believing that maybe the slowness is necessary, that healing is supposed to feel like a never ending climb. But slow healing is a story, not a law. The emotional system doesn't require years to shift, it requires a moment of clarity at the exact point that a pattern rises. There is always an instant, small but unmistakable, when the emotion begins to form and you recognize it. Most people miss that moment because they immediately merge with the feeling. They assume the surge is me rather than something happening within me. But if you can see the pattern as it surfaces, just see it. You place yourself in the position of authority instead of reaction, and that changes everything. Picture yourself stepping into a room and feeling that familiar shrinking sensation, the self doubt, the comparison, the old narrative about not belonging. You know the choreography, but this time, instead of collapsing into it, something in you stays awake. You notice the pattern before it completes itself. That tiny slice of awareness is the doorway. Emotional override begins right there, not with strain, but with recognition.
Once you notice the contraction starting, the crucial shift is understanding that the world is not causing your emotional collapse. You're reanimating an internal reflection you've carried for a long time. The first technique begins by altering the direction of that reflection. Inside your awareness, imagine a mirror angled towards you. It has been reflecting other people's judgments, imagined evaluations, and your own long rehearsed insecurities. Now, with a simple inner decision, turn the mirror outward. You're no longer absorbing the room, you are projecting into it. And from the center of your chest, speak inwardly. Return me. Return signal me. You'll feel the shift immediately. The emotion loosens. The shrinking stops. You're no longer trying to survive other people's reflections. You're generating your own field. Nothing outside you changed. You didn't need anyone to treat you differently. The power moved from outside to inside. You stopped being the echo and became the source. That's emotional override in its simplest form.
The mirror flip is the opening. Once the loop loses momentum, there's a quiet gap where you can install a new emotional state. This is where people often reach for positive thoughts, hoping the right sentences will produce the right feeling. But identity doesn't form from sentences, it forms from coherence. So instead of trying to think your way into a new state, feel for the state you want. Confidence has a texture, calm has a density, power has a center, clarity has brightness. Choose the state by sensing its tone, not by forcing emotion. Then allow your mind to offer a symbol. It may be a shape, a mark, something simple. The details don't matter. The symbol is only a container. Gather the entire emotional frequency into that symbol, compressing it until it vibrates with the essence of the state. When it feels complete, drop it into your chest and let it dissolve. The dissolution is the installation. You're not forcing yourself to feel different. The symbol broadcasts the state for you until your system adopts it. Old patterns can't withstand that kind of signal. They collapse because the new frequency is stronger than anything that they can generate.
What Paul just described is the point where emotional change stops becoming conceptual and becomes experiential. You're not arguing with your feelings or trying to outthink them. You're imprinting a new internal signal and allowing your system to reorganize around it. But even after a state is installed, many people feel a pull from their old identity. Not because it's powerful, but because it is familiar. Emotional memory has a rhythm and it tries to continue itself. Here's what most people never see. When a trigger rises, it isn't the present moment speaking. It's an older version of you attempting to reenact the past. A timeline steps forward, assuming you will play the role you've always played. And because the pattern feels familiar, most people automatically agree with it. They step into the old self without realizing they could decline. But now you know. When that earlier version appears, holding the old reflex, expecting the old response, don't merge with them. Don't analyze them. Withdraw your presence and speak a quiet, definitive declaration. That version is closed. I am the override. Feel what happens when you say it. The loop collapses. The breath changes. The mind clears. You drop back into the present because the past no longer has access to your energy. And this isn't traditional healing. This is identity correction. And once you experience how quickly a timeline can close, triggers stop feeling like threats. They become invitations to choose again.
When those older timelines lose their hold, the system needs stability. A new emotional identity can't take root without an anchor. Without anchoring, even strong states drift. You feel the shift for a moment, and then gravity pulls you back into the familiar. Anchoring prevents that drift. It turns a momentary shift into a consistent way of being. Deep in your chest lies a point that responds instantly to identity level signals. Words affect this point as frequency, not meaning. So choose a phrase that feels like the name of who you are becoming. It might be origin point, steady signal, electric calm. You'll feel the right one. It has a resonance, a sense of belonging. Place the phrase inside your chest and let it settle. The moment it lands, it activates. From then on, the tag becomes the stabilizing pulse of your internal field. When an old emotion rises, you don't fight or dissect it. You feel the tag pulse and let it realign you. The tag holds the signal steady. This isn't coping and this isn't managing. This is emotional architecture. You're defining the structure, instead of surviving the pattern.
As that anchor integrates, something subtle but transformative happens. Emotional freedom stops feeling like a task and begins to feel natural. You move through conversations that once triggered you, and there is space where the reaction used to sit. You walk into rooms that once made you contract, and instead you feel yourself expand into them. These quiet shifts show that your emotional baseline, the identity you operate from, has changed. You're no longer pleading with your nervous system to calm down. You're directing it. You're no longer waiting for external conditions to soften. You're softening your internal stance, and the world responds. This is emotional sovereignty. It isn't perfection, it's not numbness, but it's a leadership. You become the one giving the internal instructions, and everything within you follows. You begin choosing which emotional currents you engage. You stop being ruled by the echoes of who you used to be. And you realize something important. Nothing in reality had to shift before you changed. You shifted first, and reality began adjusting around you.
And as that inner coherence stabilizes, its effects become visible in your outer life. People sense the difference before they understand it. They speak to you differently. They respond with more clarity and ease. Situations unfold with a fluidity that used to feel out of reach. Opportunities appear from directions you never expected. And although part of you might want to call it coincidence, a deeper part recognizes what it is. This is what happens when your emotional field stops contradicting itself. The world stops contradicting you. Reality is always taking its cues from the tone that you broadcast. When that tone is fragmented, life feels unpredictable. When it becomes consistent, the world reorganizes around you. Think of the times you felt deeply grounded, even briefly. People noticed. They adjusted to your presence without needing to be told why. Now, imagine that steadiness as your daily foundation, not just a rare moment. That is what emotional coherence creates. Not performance, not pretending, just a genuine internal signal that the world naturally aligns with.
This is why what we're sharing with you today isn't about momentary comfort. It isn't about simply calming yourself so you can tolerate a life that feels misaligned. These shifts reach deeper. They rewrite the blueprint that determines how you move through your life. When you stop rehearsing emotional pain and stop feeding outdated patterns, you create room inside yourself that most people never experience. And in that space, clarity and self trust grow naturally. You don't lose your feeling nature as you step into this kind of sovereignty. If anything, you become more attuned. Your emotions stay alive, but they no longer run your life. They move through, and you decide which ones stay. That is the essence of emotional mastery. It's not control or suppression, but authorship. Your old identity will sometimes try to pull you back, not because it is powerful, but because habit always tries to survive. Yet familiarity is no longer enough to define you. You felt the shift of flipping the mirror and becoming the origin instead of the echo. You've experienced how a symbol dissolving into your chest can reorganize your entire state. You've seen how a single statement can close an outdated version of you. Once you've tasted that level of authority, you stop believing that change must be painful and slow. You understand that change responds to clarity.
This is the point where you begin living in a different emotional universe. You're no longer waiting for life to behave before you feel steady. You become someone life responds to because your internal signal is no longer fractured. Think of the movements that we've walked through, the mirror flips, and you stop absorbing other people's energy. The symbol dissolves, and your emotional state becomes a broadcast instead of a struggle. The old timeline closes, and the past loses its authority. The identity tag anchors your field and stabilizes your presence. These are not tricks that you remember once in a while. They become the architecture that you live from. When someone reaches this level of coherence, they stop asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? And start asking, who am I choosing to be right now? That question draws a line between reaction and identity. It shows you what is old and what is chosen. It shifts you from someone who manages emotions to someone who generates them consciously. You'll notice people responding to you as though something in you has changed, even if you've altered nothing on the surface. They feel the steadiness, they feel the clarity. Coherence is felt long before it's understood. From the outside, it can look like magic. From the inside, it feels like alignment.
And here we arrive at a place most people never reach, simply because they don't realize it exists. It's the moment emotional mastery stops being something you practice and becomes who you naturally are. You wake up in a state you once tried to reach. You move through your day with a groundedness that doesn't depend on circumstances. You navigate conversations and decisions not from old emotional residue, but from the identity you deliberately installed. Life responds differently when you operate from that level of coherence. You begin to notice that rooms feel different when you walk into them. People treat you as though you've stepped into a new level of presence. Opportunities arrange themselves around your clarity. You're no longer broadcasting mixed messages. You're no longer negotiating with old emotional versions of yourself. You're no longer living as the echo of who you used to be. You've stopped feeding the emotional architecture that held your old identity together, and you've chosen the architecture that belongs to who you are now. And when you do that consistently, emotional freedom stops being a peak moment. It becomes the ground you stand on.
Before we close, I want to speak directly to the person who has felt trapped inside emotions that seem stranger than their will. You are not broken. You never were. You were rehearsed. You repeated states that were never meant to become permanent. Now you know something most people never learn. You can uninstall those states, override them in the timeline where they had control. More powerful still, you can choose the emotional identity that you want to broadcast into the world right now. Not when life calms down. Not when you've done enough healing. Now. Emotional identity is not built from time, it's built from decision. So let this be the moment the old loops end and a new identity begins. Say it inwardly with clarity and presence. I choose who I am now. When that declaration comes from the center of your field, reality responds the only way it can. It rearranges itself around the tone you broadcast, because you're no longer living as a reaction to your past. You are living as the origin of your future. If this conversation opens something in you today, even a small point of recognition, stay connected with us. This work deepens every time we gather, every time we explore these truths together. So if you haven't yet, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who's ready for this level of understanding, and tap the notification bell so you never miss when we go deeper. Until next time, Think differently, dream boldly, and create consciously.
I'm a quiet rebel, I don't need a shout. Changing the world from the inside out. No fists in the